Okay, so I showed you how you can use Blender's texture paint to paint textures onto your model. And now I'm in Substance Painter, and I'm going to show you how I go about doing that in Substance Painter. You'll need the Substance Painter export file or setup. I don't remember what they call it, but I'll leave a link in the description. But you can get that from the Explain Developer website. And so here I am just bringing in my model into Substance Painter. So you'll export your model as an FBX file, and that's what Substance Painter will read. So here I am grabbing that FBX. I also grabbed the ambient occlusion map that I created in Blender. And so here you'll see my model's now been pulled into Substance Painter, and we're just going to kind of jump right in. Before we start painting, so that some of the procedural materials can work properly, we go over to our texture settings, and we need to bake the mesh maps. And so you'll see me select that right here. On the ambient occlusion, I can tell it, I can just select the ambient occlusion map, which I did, and so then here I uncheck ambient occlusion because I don't need it to bake me a new one. And then I just let it bake everything else. It actually didn't need to bake the ID map because I did not create any texture IDs, and so it'll give an error that says it couldn't bake that ID map, but that's not an issue. The handy thing with Substance Painter is because it's creating all these maps and it's got a lot of procedural materials, it can do a lot of the base work for you, and then you just have to go back through and add your little details here and there, but you can get a lot accomplished in a very short amount of time using Substance Painter. And so here you'll see I started just going with the same kind of workflow idea that I did in my Blender paint, so that you could see kind of the difference in how quickly you can do stuff. I did add, this is just the quick panel plastic texture that is there, and then I'll go in and start working on that carbon fiber. But so here you see I'm just trying to figure out what specific texture I want, and then I add a black mask to tell it I only want it drawn on specific sections. And now you'll see I'm adding the carbon fiber, and just like that it's been applied to all of those objects that we applied it to in Blender as well. You'll see it, you can apply it a whole lot faster, and then you can adjust the scale of it and all that, and so just like that I've already applied that carbon fiber, and it's gone ahead and wrapped it around all the edges and everything, and it's included a normal map or a bump map with it that is going to be part of that texture as well, and that's one of the real highlights of using Substance Painter, is it does all of that for you rather than needing to do it all by hand. And so here I'm beginning to texture the handles. You'll see I've already got a metal kind of chrome-like texture on there, and now I'm getting my plastic pieces textured, and now Substance Painter, when you export your images, it's going to create not only your main texture, your albedo, but it also will create your normal texture, and it can create your lit texture, and that's including all of the height information, all the bump information, all of the glossy, shiny, rough information. All of that gets exported. And so at this point, I think I've spent about a half hour on what you currently see on the screen, and that's already way beyond what I had done in Blender's texture paint. That texture paint I did in Blender, it took me 45 minutes or an hour, and at that point all I had was a little bit of carbon fiber and some text, and that didn't include any kind of bump map or height detail or any of that. And so you can see you can get a lot more accomplished a lot quicker using Substance Painter. And so here I'm just pulling in those same resources that I used in Blender's texture paint, and you can do kind of the same method of go ahead and just paint it onto your object again. And so you'll see me going about that and adding all of that detail. And again, and you can also pull up a 2D view of your texture map and see where it's painting everything, and go in and adjust for things. For example, here the airspeed and knots was hidden behind that airspeed needle, and so I pull up the 2D texture to paint that on there so that it can be visible. You get a pretty good preview of how things look, but they're not going to look exactly the same in the sim. So you'll end up wanting to export your texture and see how it looks in the sim and go back and tweak things here and there. But you will get a fairly good idea of how it looks with being able to adjust your lighting and everything. So here you'll see I wanted those labels kind of large, but I couldn't get them to fully fit with the handles in the way, so I just kind of marked the tops of them, and then I went to my 2D texture to lay them out. And I was getting a little bit of a strange bleed through. I'm not quite sure what caused that, because it was starting to paint in areas that I didn't think it was supposed to. But anyway, I've got it to kind of lay out the way I wanted. But you can see how quick and easy it is to throw your textures and all your labels and everything onto the object. Another really handy thing with using Substance Painter is you can work at a lower resolution if your computer is struggling with a 4K texture. For most of this, I'm working on a 2K texture, and Substance Painter, it's just keeping track of everything, and so you can then later upscale your texture or downscale it, and everything will still look right. You'll just get that higher definition if you jump up to 4K for your export. And here's a neat feature. So now on those screw heads, because I didn't want to waste geometry, um, I'm now going to use the normal map, and I'm just going to paint in that normal detail, and you'll see that it now creates that detail for us, and it saves us trying to model it and wasting that space when it's really not necessary. Again, you can in a paint program create your own normal detail, but it's certainly a lot faster and easier to do it inside Substance Painter. And here's a part where I was trying to add just a little bit of dust in the crevices, and here I'm playing with the masks and all of that. I didn't end up liking this texture, and so I end up deleting it, which you'll do a lot. You'll try something and, oh, I don't like that, so try something else. But there's so much power with all the different options and using all the different maps and masking that you can create some very, very realistic textures, and you can just make things really impressive in the sim using this method. And Substance Painter comes with a lot of included textures and maps and grunge and all of that to be used. I don't think that I have anything added apart from the few text images that I created myself. Everything else came standard with Substance Painter. So you'll notice that all this time I'd been working with those G1000s not having a texture on them, and so just now I'm starting to create their own texture. They're a different kind of plastic than I felt the handles and the other plastics were that I created, so I made my own made a texture just specific for those bezels, and I think it adds a bit of detail when you're able to do that. And you can tell that there's a difference in what kind of plastic was used on the individual pieces that were created. So here you can see I'm trying to paint in this little stripe on these handles, and along with that I'm painting a little bit of normal detail or bump detail, and that helps to it just adds a little extra detail. And there I jumped into the 2D view so that I could paint a nice straight line. Now I'm looking for a way to bump in on these circuit breakers. There's a little bit of a recess on the front face of circuit breakers, and so I'm just trying to find a good stamp basically to stamp in that detail. And you can see even just something as simple as that actually creates quite an impressive look to that face that was just a flat modeled face. Here I wanted to rough up this nut area that right now is using the same texture as the polished shaft there that those handles slide on, but the nuts I didn't feel they should be quite as shiny, and so I was just roughing those up a little bit. Then I'll go back through and kind of dirty them up a little as well. So now you see me going through and I'm getting ready to add the text to these switches. And on these switches, that text is actually slightly inset, or yeah, I guess inset or engraved into the switch. And so here I'm just finding just the right setting to use the height value to not only put the text on there, but to also kind of sink it into the switch. So now I've found the value that I like for how sunk in it is, and now I can just go through and add the rest of the labeling. And then just trying to add a new metal texture and detail for the ignition key here, and also using the ability to stamp in some normal detail to kind of give that key a little more flavor than just a flat surface there. And here, now that I've got most of my textures figured out, I've decided to go in and try and dirty up or dust up a little bit of this, a little of the texturing. Even though this is a fairly new airplane, you still want some dust. I mean, nothing's perfectly clean, even if you clean it really well. Even if you've detailed your car, it seems like only a couple hours later you're noticing dust again. And so you got to add just a little bit of variation, a little bit of dust, a little change in the reflections, and it gives you a lot more believable texture, and you'll be a lot more happy with how it turns out if you take the time to go back through and add in this information. And so I used a procedural texture to create some of that detail, and now I'm going back through and hand painting away and adding the different areas where I felt it either had too much or didn't have enough. And that really will differentiate your texture from someone else's, is adding in that hand painted detail.